Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Pharmacy's webinar today. I'm Tom Glinsky, Chief Inspector, and with me today is Kimberly Grinston, the Board's Executive Director. Before we get started on the webinar, we will go through just some general slides. If you have not been on one of our webinars before, you are in listen-only mode. If you have any issues with audio during the program, via the computer, you do have an option to call in. There's dial-in instructions on your GoToWebinar toolbar. Our program today has been approved for 1 hour of CE. Computer sharing is not allowed. You must be signed in under your own username to get credit, and that's signed in at the GoToWebinar website. I have further instructions on how to get CE at the end of the webinar. We do not submit CE to the CPE monitor, so make sure you save your certificates. We have handouts for today's slides. They're found in 2 spots. You can find them on the board's website on the left side of the home page under upcoming events, or on your GoToWebinar toolbar. There is a tab that says handouts. If you click that down arrow, you'll then see a PDF of the handouts that you can download. We do record our webinars and post them on the board's website. And we will hopefully have time to take questions at the end of today's program. If you'd like to send a question to us, go to your toolbar under questions, type it in and hit send. And like I said, if we have time, we'll take those, and we will only take those that are related to the topic of today's webinar. So we'll now get started. Today we have 4 regulations that we want to talk about. 2 of them are revised ones, standards of operation and pharmacists in charge. And then the later 2 are brand new rules related to technology being used in final product verification. And then after we discuss those, again, we'll take questions at the end. Throughout the program today, Kim and I will change back and forth on presenting different slides. So I'll turn it over to Kim now.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you everyone for joining us for the webinar. So before we get started, I thought it would be good to talk about the why. We will tell you the what in just a moment, but it's always good to start with the why. We've received questions on why the board made regulatory changes. Why were these changes enacted now? And I just wanted to summarize or just hit just a couple of key points. First of all, the board's mission and goal is to protect patients. And so a lot of the revisions pertain directly to protecting patients and enhancing patient safety. The other reason for the rule revisions is to address, or was to address, some of the working conditions and pharmacy operations complaints, concerns, and questions that have come into the board. We'll provide more information about that in just a minute. Of course, the board is still engaged in its standards of practice review, and that review is focused on really removing restrictive requirements that get in the way of you all doing what you need to do, and instead stating the applicable standard of practice. So you will see that throughout the discussion on today and in the new rules. And then finally, we wanted to remove regulatory barriers that were unnecessary or no longer needed. Where to find copies of the new rules? They are on the board's website. If you click on statutes and rules, and then you link to the Code of State Regulations, you will see the new rules. They are currently in the code. All 4 rules are effective August 30th of 2022. So you want to keep that date in mind. Let's start with standards of operation. And this is primarily Rule 2.010. This is a current rule. Tom will talk about some of our new rules in just a moment. One of the major changes in the rule is a new requirement that says or prohibits pharmacies from introducing any policies, procedures, systems, or practices that jeopardize or inhibit or threaten patient safety or the safe provision of pharmacy services. I started off with saying that the board's primary mission is to protect the public, and this is a key public protection piece. Pharmacies, licensees, permit holders should be looking at any metrics, quotas, or performance targets or goals that endanger safe patient care. Now, that doesn't mean that pharmacies can't establish metrics and or quotas in certain areas. However, those metrics or quotas, first of all, should be based on substantial evidence or statistical evidence, but they also can't endanger safe patient care. And that goes for any practice in the pharmacy. And so we're talking about metrics and goals. I think that the title is not important. It really is what the requirement does. Anything such as vaccine requirements, a number of vaccines per day, number of prescriptions per day, pharmacy wait times. We've received reports that pharmacies in response have already notified licensees that their metrics are safe and they will not be making any changes. The board is going to be looking for a good faith effort here. Pharmacies, especially when it comes to patient safety, should be reviewing what they require to make sure it doesn't threaten patients. Staff training and competency, this is probably a given. All staff must be trained and competent to perform the duties assigned. We recommend that you establish a training or competency plan for training staff that includes new and current staff. You'll see that in the next bullet point, initial and ongoing competency assessments. You may have hired an employee several years ago who may no longer be competent right now with current software and technology. So we recommend that you establish a training plan for both, and also recommend, as always, that you document training. Inspectors may be looking for compliance during an inspection. 2.010, and this is probably the one change that has gotten probably the most conversation, I think, out in the licensing world. And I forgot to mention that we did publish the June newsletter, and there's a lot of additional information in the newsletter about these new provisions. And so some of this will be a repeat of that. But the current no pharmacist on duty sign, this is not a new requirement. Again, this is the board accommodating current times, if you will. It can now be posted in print or electronically. It still must be at least 2-inch, letters must be at least 2 inches. So just remember that, but now that sign can be posted electronically. There's also a new requirement to post a board regulatory sign. And I'm gonna go back to the why here again. I was in an international licensing conference of national, state, international regulators. And one of the things we talked about is how can you protect the public if they don't know you're there? And there was some statistical data about how many members of the public actually knew that a licensing board existed. And so this comes out of that discussion and the idea that patients should know who to contact if there is a question or a concern. So the new rule will require posting of a board regulatory sign, and this is the sign that the board has approved. The board will be sending a copy of the sign to all pharmacies located in Missouri for free. Those should go in the mail, if not this week, next week. So you should have those well in advance of August 30th. Again, it's going to be provided by the board, applies to all licensed pharmacies located in Missouri. Non-resident pharmacies, the board will be discussing the requirements for that later. Please monitor the board's website for additional information. Someone's asked what size is the sign, because we know counter space may be limited at a pharmacy. It's your standard 8.5 by 11. It is on heavier cardstock, so it's a little bit more durable. It must be prominently posted in close proximity to the pharmacy. It must be easily viewable and readable by the public. So we want something that the public can actually see. Electronic signs, again, you can post the board sign or you can post an electronic sign. It must be similar to the board sign. You don't have to use the same colors, but it's got to be, again, something that the patient can see. It must be constantly visible by the public during the pharmacy's normal business hours. So if the pharmacy is closed, you don't need to have the sign posted. But or you can leave it up, you know, all day if you'd like, but you don't have to. But sign lettering on electronic signs must equal or exceed the board sign. Again, board is mailing these signs out for free to all licensees. Contact the board's office for a replacement. Also, we will have an electronic version available on the board's website. So if you choose to copy it, enlarge it, we ask that you not modify it. But again, if you are going to do so, it just needs to equal or exceed the board sign in lettering. So a couple of questions, and some of these have already come in the chat box. If it's electronic, can it be a message that rotates on a cycle with other messages, sort of those rolling screens? The answer to that question is no. The electronic sign must be constantly displayed. So if the first sign is the board regulatory sign, and then it rotates to a sign about vaccines that is not compliant, it must be constantly visible. If your pharmacy is closed door, do you still need to post the sign? We've gotten this question a lot. The answer is yes. The requirement is applicable to all pharmacies located in Missouri, even if you are a closed door pharmacy. So people have asked, if you are a closed door pharmacy, where do you need to post it? Again, it just has to be prominently displayed. We would recommend in a lobby or entrance way. You have discretion on where to post in these instances. And what about hospital pharmacies? As you all know, the Department of Health has jurisdiction over hospital pharmacy services within the licensed premises. However, you will need to post a board regulatory sign if you are licensed with the board. For hospital pharmacies that are not licensed with the board, do not have to post the regulatory sign unless otherwise required by the department, and we're not aware of that requirement. So that's general summary of what's happening with the sign. And I see some questions coming in on that. We'll try to get to those during the Q&A period. Let's talk about the other issue that has, of course, gotten a lot of questions in the board office, and that is the new requirement for identification badges. So effective August 30th, 2022, all licensees must have, well, a couple of things. First, let's talk about licenses. All licensees must have a 2x2 photo attached to their license. This is current for pharmacists, but this is new for interns and pharmacy technicians. And I'm going to connect that with the next bullet point in just a minute. We've had questions come in, can the picture be larger than 2x2? Of course, it shouldn't be smaller than 2x2, but if you have a larger picture, that's fine. We don't need an official passport photo. It just needs to be a picture of the licensee or registrant. Again, it applies now to interns and technicians. Individual licenses can be posted in a central location on the pharmacy's premises. This is a change with the board removing requirements that may not necessarily be needed at this time. So all of you may know pharmacy licenses or individual licenses have to be posted on the wall. We have walked into pharmacies and we see the wall of licenses that first the public cannot see, and they are just a sort of stapled together on a billboard of some sort or a poster board. The board removed that requirement. You can still post on the wall if you'd like to, but right now licenses, individual licenses, can be posted in a central location on the pharmacy's premises. So that means they can be on the wall or in a binder or in a cabinet, in a book in the administrative office, just as long as they are available on inspection by the board and also available to the public if requested. If someone from the public asks to see the license, the rule requires, and this isn't new, that you show them the license. Pharmacy permits still have to be conspicuously posted in the pharmacy permit area. That hasn't changed. So your pharmacy permit should still be posted. However, your individual licenses and registrations, you now have the option to either post those or put those in a central location. The requirement for a technician list has been removed. Again, this is removing regulatory burden. So the technician list that you all used to, that is currently required as of today, that needs to be updated as technicians come and go. As of August 30th, you no longer need to maintain a technician list. Instead, we will be looking for individual licenses and registrations. Okay, so here's the identification portion. And again, we've gotten a lot of questions about this. Effective August 30th, all licensees and registrants must wear an identification badge or some other article identifying their name and their title, meaning are they a pharmacist, an intern, or a technician. The board on purpose didn't want to add or include any requirements that were very stringent. So this is really in the pharmacy's discretion. We recommend that pharmacies establish policies and procedures so that you have a consistent ID requirement, and generally, as long as it meets the requirement of the rule, name and title, it's acceptable. You'll see some examples on on your screen right now. These are not recommendations. You can use a handwritten badge. You could technically do a piece of paper and a safety pin. We don't recommend it, but we really wanted to be flexible here to make sure this wasn't burdensome. A lot of people have asked about the why. Why is the board doing this? I think one of the questions we received was, does the board have anything better to do? Which is always fun. But to be honest, this is a patient safety issue. So we receive calls at the board office every day from patients who will tell us, I talked with someone at the pharmacy, I was vaccinated by someone at the pharmacy, and we always ask, do you know who it was? And a lot of times we are getting descriptions like the person with the brown hair with the white coat on. And we don't know who that person is. And if you look at other healthcare professions, nursing, physicians, even physician assistants and other allied professionals, they're required to identify themselves so that patients know who they may be dealing with and or who they may be vaccinated by. Interestingly, when we filed this rule was filed at the same time as a rule from another department on delivering meals to senior care centers. And they were requiring ID badges to deliver a meal to a senior care center. If you are, since we have licensees and registrants who are handling sensitive patient data, they are answering sensitive medical questions, they are also vaccinating. We think that this is an important public safety protection, that the public knows who they may be talking to and or receiving services from, and also what their title is. So again, some examples of what's acceptable. This can be handwritten. It can also include a smock. So we have been asked if someone can have an embroidered smock or embroidered clothing, that's fine, as long as it includes the name and the title. Some example of things that are not compliant, just having the title, just the name, those are not compliant. Some of the fun things like just RX pharmacy tech, again, that's another example of something that would not be compliant. Other than that, you really have a lot of freedom. So let's talk about questions that we've received. And again, we've gotten a lot of these in the board office. We've been asked, if my name is Michael, can I use the term Mike on the badge? And the board has determined that is okay. Again, the goal here is to make sure that the public can identify you. So if we get a call and we need to identify Mike, if everyone in the pharmacy calls this person Mike, or everyone knows them as Mike, then we think that's okay. So you can use alternative names. We've been asked about middle names. If I go by my middle name, is that okay? And again, the answer is yes. If you have a common name that may not be your birth name, so let's say everyone calls you Chuck, or everyone calls you Mickey, if you will, and that's how everyone identifies you at the pharmacy, that is acceptable, but this is in the discretion of the permit holder. Again, pharmacies and the pharmacists in charge should be looking at their policies and procedures and how they want staff to identify themselves. Do you have to include your last name? Again, that's up to your permit holder or the pharmacist in charge. You're not required to under the rule. It just says identify yourself. You can do first name only. I mentioned embroidered smocks or shirts. Those are acceptable. It doesn't need to be a physical name badge. On title, we've been asked, can people use abbreviations like RPH or PharmD instead of pharmacist? Some of that may be a space issue. Right now, absent further direction from the board, then yes, that is acceptable. However, there are terms out there like CPHT. The public generally may not know what that means and could confuse that with the pharmacist. The goal here, and I want everyone to go back to the goal is to make sure that the public can identify who you are and your title. So we would recommend against using CPHT because it doesn't clearly say that the person is a technician. Someone has asked in the chat box, can you use the term lead pharmacy technician? Absolutely. Supervising pharmacy technician, supervising tech. I think all of those things will work. We're looking for a good faith effort here. Board doesn't want to be dogmatic on this, and we want to give pharmacies the flexibility to accommodate their staff. So we'll answer questions. I see a lot of them in the chat box, and I'll turn it over to Tom.
Or now talk about some of the other changes that are in the standards of operations rule. Some of these are new and others are just kind of codifying what the board has always interpreted and has enforced. So the first one here, the use requirement to wear gloves when handling individual tablets and capsules. We've always been enforcing that, but now it's specifically in the rule. It specifically says that. However, a brand new requirement is medication may not be stored on the floor. And what we're talking about here is stock bottles sitting directly on the floor. We see this a lot of times. It's a large bottle of potassium that there's just not room on the shelf, or there's not room for two of them, or it may be a large unit of use package, such as maybe like a colonoscopy prep gallon bottle. There's no room on the shelf, and we find them just sitting on the floor. So that will no longer be allowed for medication to sit directly on the floor. The rule now says your storage area must be thermostatically controlled. That's always kind of been a given. We had to build that into the drug distributor rule to get that enforced. Pharmacists, seem to always comply with that. However, it is now in the rule. But related to temperatures, we do have a new requirement that you record and review at least once a day the temperature in all drug storage areas. So, and that's when the pharmacy is in operation. So that will be a new requirement for most pharmacies. It's currently required now for just Class H sterile compounding pharmacies. So at the end of August, that will be required for all pharmacies. There is an allowance in the rule that in lieu of daily review, you may use a continuous recording device. However, that device must provide ongoing documentation of the temperature, and it must alert you if the temperature is out of range. So you'll have to, if you have a recording device, make sure it meets those requirements. We have had some questions about storage of data on some of those devices, so make sure yours is storing it properly. So come to the questions where you can drugs be stored in a tote on the floor? Yes, that's fine. We're talking about individual stock bottles sitting on the floor, or an individual patient-filled prescription sitting on the floor. If they're in a tote, a bag, a tray, that is fine. We're talking about just individual containers on the floor. If drugs are just stored at room temperature, do I have to record it? Yes, this applies to all temperatures. So it would be freezer, refrigerator, and room temperature. Do I have to record the temperature if the pharmacy is not open certain days? The answer is no. The rule says just when it's in operation. And we have been asked, if I'm using an electronic recording device, do I have to be able to access those records during an inspection? The answer is yes. As with a lot of electronic records on inspection, usually we run into trouble with people knowing how to retrieve them. So if you do have a system like that, you want to make sure you know how to get into it to access those records. Facility requirements, again, the first one here, we do not allow drop-down ceilings or other openings that could allow access. We've always enforced that. It's now specifically spelled out in rule. The second bullet here is regarding pharmacists located in residence. Other than a Class I, and so a Class I is a consultant pharmacy, we will no longer allow a pharmacy to be located in a residence, and that's regardless of what the zoning is for that area. Off-site drug storage, we've allowed this. There has been a couple revisions to this section. If you have a breach in security at an off-site drug storage facility, you must report that within 15 days. We've had that requirement for off-site confidential record storage, but not for drug storage, so it's now been modified to include both. And then if you're using a facility to store drugs for more than one pharmacy, you would be required to license as a drug distributor. And there is a new, in the rule, an exemption process built in that someone could request an exemption from the board for certain facility requirements. Usually this happens at an initial inspection, and usually involving the sink with pharmacies that don't store drugs or do any dispensing, wanting to have access to a sink somewhere else in the building. So that's now built as an option. It's not a guarantee, and the board will review each request individually and approve or disapprove them. Just some other miscellaneous things that are in the rule. There's now any record that doesn't have a specific retention time built into another rule or law must be kept for 2 years. So there are some records out there that the rule that requires them doesn't say how long they're to be kept. Example would be I believe the MedPAC rule. I think there's something in the Class J rule talks about records, and it really doesn't say how long to keep them. So any record that's not already specified in rule, you must keep for 2 years. Prescription and medication orders shall not be filled or refilled after 1 year from the date issued. This was currently what's been enforced, but the language was a little vague. It actually talked about when it was presented, not issued. So that's cleaned up in the new rule, in the revised rule. And then it does allow for the use of technology in the final verification process. And that's what the two rules I talk about it later on in the webinar are about. Mandatory reporting, the board's always had different kinds of mandatory reporting with different requirements. They now kind of all been grouped in together under this new section in the rule. It requires that any mandatory reporting be done within 15 days. It needs to be in writing or electronically. Most of these we do have on our website an actual submission page where you can submit electronically directly on our page. The two types that come along are if you're a licensee, so that could be an individual or it could be a permit. If you have an action taken against you by another agency, another board, state board of pharmacy, anything like that, you have to report that to us within 15 days. And then for pharmacies taking action on their employees, pharmacists, interns, or technicians, if they're terminated or take any kind of disciplinary action, they have to report that to us within 15 days. That's pretty much been standard out there. It's now all covered under one rule. There's now a cooperation requirement in the rule. It tells licensees, permit holders, and registrants must cooperate with any investigation or inspection conducted by or on behalf of the board. This is a new requirement. It says that you must respond fully and promptly to questions, provide copies or execute releases for documents, allow us to take photos or images of your facility, and you must appear for interviews, hearings, or other meetings as requested by the board or the board authorized designee. Inspectors are board authorized designees, so this does refer to when we request an interview with a licensee. And then finally in this rule is a revision on pharmacist in charge changes. The requirement that you always have a pharmacist in charge stays the same. In the past, it just said you had to immediately notify the board. We're now telling you you have 15 days to notify us of the change, but you still have to make a change immediately. But the rule now allows for an interim supervising pharmacist who can be used for 30 days if you have trouble finding a permanent pharmacist in charge. So you can name an interim supervising pharmacist. They still must take a controlled substance inventory at the time. They can serve for 30 days. You cannot appoint someone else after that 30 days and name a different person. So it's only a 30-day allowance. So after 30 days, you must have named a new pick. There'll be no cost for this, and there is a form currently is available on the board's website that you can use to name this. And again, this doesn't change the requirement that you must operate with a pick. It now gives you an option of a pick or an interim supervising pharmacist.
So we're going to move along, and we may modify the webinar just a little bit because we're getting a lot of questions in, and I want to make sure we cover a lot of the things that will be effective as of the end of August. So let's talk about 2.090 and the pharmacist in charge rule and some changes that have been made there. Many of you who may remember the pharmacist in charge rule, I think it was about a page and a half of just a list of requirements. We were into double letters, so we'd gone A through Z, and I think we were moving into NN and OO. The board looked at a lot of those requirements to see what is still necessary. This is, again, our idea or the board's goal to streamline board regulations and remove unnecessary requirements. So 2.090 will look and does look very different. So a lot of the requirements were moved to 2.010 under pharmacy standards of operation. The main goal was to really recognize the PIC's role and responsibilities. We have always said that the PIC is responsible in conjunction with the permit holder for ensuring pharmacy compliance and supervising pharmacy staff. The pharmacist in charge can be held personally responsible, and their individual pharmacist license could be disciplined, as well as the pharmacy permit for pharmacy noncompliance. And we really wanted to recognize the role and the responsibilities of a PIC in the new rule. So you will see several changes. Number one, the PIC must be actively engaged in pharmacy activities. The 090 now says the PIC must also be physically present at the pharmacy, physically present, for a sufficient amount of time as needed to effectively supervise pharmacy operations and ensure pharmacy compliance. We were asked, and there were suggestions that came in, that the board mandate a minimum number of hours, that a PIC must be there full-time or 40 hours per week. At this time, the board left this in the discretion of permit holders. Again, this is the standards of practice approach. The board recognizes that finding a mandatory time limit or time frame will be difficult for all practice settings, something that will work for all practice settings. So the board left this in the discretion of permit holders and the pharmacist in charge. You should be reviewing pharmacy operations to see what time do you need to be there? What is a sufficient amount of time to adequately supervise pharmacy operations? The board remains concerned with instances where we have PICs who are PICs for multiple pharmacies, especially if those pharmacies are located large distances from each other. The board questions how a PIC can adequately supervise both pharmacies, not saying it couldn't be done, but it's something that should be considered. While not required, the board recommends, or we recommend, that you consider several things when determining how long should the PIC physically be at the pharmacy. Look at the pharmacy's volume and operations, staff, peak times. Is it flu season or is it not? Look at the pharmacy's compliance and inspection history. If the pharmacy's most recent inspection showed several issues and or areas of noncompliance, or you have a history of noncompliance, that should be considered when determining how often a PIC should be or needs to be at the pharmacy. Of course, the board would recommend full-time would always be best. We understand that may not always happen, but it is now required in the rule that the PIC must be actively engaged and they must be physically present for a sufficient amount of time to ensure compliance. Looking at pharmacy working conditions, the PIC must be consulted and given an opportunity to provide input before the pharmacy implements any policy, procedure, system, or practice that will modify or expand the delivery of pharmacy services. Essentially, what this means is that before the pharmacy adopts or moves into another area of pharmacy services, the PIC should be consulted. Again, the PIC is co-responsible for compliance and should have a chance to provide input. What that looks like right now is in the discretion of the permit holder. So that could be a physical face-to-face conversation. It could be a meeting, but that's not required. The permit holder and the PIC should look at what is required to make sure that the PIC's consultation and input is given in. A lot of times the board remains concerned with pharmacies where standards are set by people who are not actually in the pharmacy and experiencing an issue. This will at least allow us to have or require the input of the pharmacist in charge who should be there on a regular basis. Again, looking at pharmacy working conditions, the PIC must be given designated time to review pharmacy compliance while the PIC is not engaged in dispensing medication or providing patient services. That means a time when they're not verifying scripts, counseling patients, answering phones. PIC's job is serious. Again, they can be held personally liable. So they must be given a period of time when they're not engaged in the normal medication dispensing or patient services or providing patient services to actually see what's happening at the pharmacy and review compliance. How long does that need to be? Again, this is a standards of practice approach. The board did not have or include a standard time frame. That will vary depending on the pharmacy and also the pharmacy's volume, clinical activities, level of staff. Permit holders and PICs should collaboratively, work together to identify what that time review interval should be and what would be appropriate given the pharmacy's volume. Again, good faith effort should be made here because it's hard to monitor compliance and review pharmacy records and check on inspection history or inspection issues if you're also answering phones, giving vaccines, verifying prescriptions, and at the counter at the same time. Staffing, this is another new addition. The permit holder must establish policies and procedures for regularly reviewing staffing and resource needs with the PIC. They should be talking with the PIC about what the pharmacy needs, both staffing and resources, and also establish a policy and procedure for requesting additional staff or staffing modifications. One of the things that we saw during the pandemic was that we had PICs who there were issues with pharmacy staffing and no one knew how to request additional staff or that staff be modified. Again, this is in the permit holder's discretion. This is a standard of practice approach, but you should make sure the PIC has a meaningful opportunity to discuss staffing concerns and needs. Again, a regular review is now required. To protect patients, and this is a direct patient safety mechanism, the PIC must have authority to temporarily suspend or restrict pharmacy operations or activities if deemed necessary to ensure pharmacy compliance or to make sure pharmacy services are safely provided. This is pending final direction of approval from the permit holder. So let me clarify that just a little bit. PIC must have authority to temporarily suspend all or some of the pharmacy's operations if it threatens patient safety. So let's say this is a bad day and you've got a lot of call-ins, people out sick, drive-through is full, the vaccine line is full, the lobby is full, phones are ringing. One of the concerns the board expressed is we observed pharmacies that were continuing to take on new patients, continuing to add vaccines, even though the pharmacy could not safely handle the volume that it was currently dealing with. We have actually seen dispensing errors that we believe may have been directly related to the staffing in the pharmacy and the ability of staff to safely provide pharmacy services. The PIC must have ability to temporarily suspend or restrict pharmacy operations if things are unsafe. Of course, this is pending final direction or approval from the permit holder. We think that a clear and documented communication and action plan is key here. We don't want to interrupt patient services, but if there's a plan in place before the emergency happens for communicating when there are issues, and I want to couple this with the staffing requirement that the board added as well. If there are issues that arise where patient safety is threatened, if you have a communication plan, the PIC has to have authority to temporarily shut down drive-through, stop vaccines, or take whatever measures may be necessary to address the patient safety issues until further direction from the permit holder. So that is just a general requirement. We've got a lot of questions in on what we've done so far. Tom?
We could move the product verification rules to our next webinar and not talk about those today and answer some of the questions.
I think that's a good suggestion. I was going to suggest the same thing because a lot of the product verification rules, so for those who do not know, the board also promulgated new rules to allow electronically assisted verification for pharmacists and also to allow technology assisted verification by technicians and intern pharmacists. I think we should go through the questions now today and then move those to the webinar we're having on August 12th. Is that right?
I believe it's 11th.
August 11th. I knew it was in August. And if we have time, we'll try to do just a bird's eye view of some of those questions. So I'll go through some of the questions we've answered already, but I'll do that again. Someone has asked about the need for name tags when the pharmacy is not open to the public. Well, there are a couple of things there. We've heard of pharmacies that are not open to the public, but may occasionally allow someone from the public to visit the pharmacy. Also, we have pharmacies that interact with other professionals and other people who may need to know who they are talking with, including delivery drivers, other staff. I can think in, hospital pharmacies where you have other healthcare professionals that may be interacting with pharmacy staff. And so there is a need, even in those quote unquote not open to the public pharmacy cases, to identify who you're talking to. That also could be new staff, IT staff, should know who they're talking with at the pharmacy, and if they're talking with a pharmacist, a technician, or an intern. Someone has asked about hospital pharmacies and the ID badge requirement. Yes, it does apply to hospital pharmacies as well if they are licensed with the board. Hospital pharmacies under the department's jurisdiction that do not hold a board license, this would not apply to you.
We have someone asking about digital temperature data loggers and wanting to know, it says they have to pay a monthly fee if you want to store the data longer than a month. Is that sufficient? No, it's not. You must keep those records for 2 years. So I would recommend you either download it off the logger onto your own system or print it, somehow store it yourself, or it sounds like you're going to have to pay the monthly fee for the company to store it for you.
Someone is asking, can the technician picture be black and white? Yes, we don't have a requirement on that. Again, we're flexible, no smaller than 2 by 2. Board inspectors just need to be able to verify who it is when we look at the license. Someone asked if they could maintain an electronic photo directory that may be connected with their HR system. And so they would have licenses, but the photos themselves will be electronically in another location. Our rule says that the photo has to be attached to the license. So a separate electronic photo log would not be compliant. Someone is asking, where should the license be posted for staff that floats between locations? I know this is very common. We are recommending that you post at your primary pharmacy, where the technician or intern or pharmacist primarily works. For all other locations, they just need to have proof of licensure in their possession. So that could be a wallet card, that could be their printout from the board's website, an online verification from our website. They just need to have that on their possession while they're there. But we would recommend that you post where you primarily practice or where the individual primarily practices.
Someone's wanting to know, does the posting require the Class N? Class N is an automated dispensing system at a long-term care facility. Yes, you'll need to post the sign. I would recommend you just post it on the machine or the room the machine is located in.
Someone's asking about licenses again. Can they be stored electronically? No, we need to see the physical copy of the license.
With a photo attached
With
to
a
it.
photo attached.
It comes back to your question is you can't, the photo needs to be attached to the physical license. You can store that somewhere else, but you can't, I don't know how you can do that. You can't do them separately.
Someone's asking for the ID badge. Can you use a lanyard for the title and the ID card for the name? Yes, again, good faith effort, as long as the public can see it. If we can look at the individual and they're wearing the required identification information, even if part is on the lanyard and one is on the ID card, that's fine.
We have someone asking about the no pharmacist on duty sign. Is one sign posted at the pharmacy department sufficient? The rule requires it be posted at the entrance and on the pharmacy counter is what the rule requires.
There's someone asking a question about quotas and metrics and how is safe defined. And they put in the chat box that, that what the permit holder of pharmacy may think is safe may not be what staff knows to be safe. And so again, this is a standard of practice approach. There isn't a definition of safe that will be applicable to all pharmacies. It is going to depend on the nature of your operations, your workflow. The board has made a recommendation that pharmacies review their workflow process because what may be unsafe in one pharmacy may be completely safe with properly trained staff with appropriate resources. So again, this is a standards of practice approach. Pharmacies should be looking, permit holders, PICs should be looking at the pharmacy practices to see if this quota or this metric is unsafe. We have, I remember an investigation, I think I mentioned this on a previous webinar, we've seen instances where if you do the numbers and the averages, pharmacists had literally a matter of seconds to provide a vaccine and also counsel the patient. That is something that it was an impossible standard. You should be looking at that and monitoring that as well.
Someone's asking about posting the sign in a pharmacy located in a clinic. You still have to post it. If your pharmacy is in Missouri, there is no exemption for posting the sign. So it doesn't matter where it's located at.
There's a question about gloves. Someone's asking, are gloves required when using a counting tray, but you're not physically touching the medication?
The answer is no, you don't have to wear gloves. And I think someone's also asked about if you're using like an automated counter where you pour it into it. The answer would be no, as well, unless you're touching them individually.
And again, this is a patient safety sanitation issue. Most pharmacies don't allow that now. We've just incorporated that into rule as an official standard.
Someone's asking about posting of pharmacy technician applications. Are you still required to post those? You're actually not required to post them. You're supposed to keep a copy in the pharmacy and have it available. So you really don't have to post the application on the wall. A lot of places do that. You just have to keep a copy of it in case anyone asks to see that. Clarification on storing on the floor, drugs on the floor. Does this apply to bulk items that may be in like a case, cardboard case? And their example is IV fluids. No, as long as it's in the cardboard case it came in, that's fine. We're talking about an individual IV bag sitting on the floor. Someone's asking about where are we using for the temperature range. We're using USP definitions of what temperature ranges are. Someone wants clarification on ambient temperature storage. Yes, you still have to record the temperature for ambient drug storage areas. Someone wants examples of when a glove is required. Well, the prime example is making filling bubble cards. When they have to individually handle the tablet and capsules when making bubble cards is a prime example where we normally see it, but there have been other ones where people are breaking. We've seen people break tablets with their fingers instead of using a device to break them. That would require the use of gloves.
Someone's asking about the tech list and why it's no longer required. And that is because, yes, you are correct, because licenses and pictures will now be together, and also because of ID badges. So having a technician list is no longer required. And I know we've had pharmacies that have struggled with keeping that list up to date as technicians come and go into or change job duties.
How long do you need to keep temperature records? It will be a 2-year record.
Someone's asking again about wearing gloves. Do techs need to wear gloves when they're filling, or just if they are physically touching the actual pills? Only when they are physically touching the actual pill. That is the change in 010.
Yeah, someone wants clarification on drop-down ceilings. Are they not allowed at all? No, you can have a drop-down ceiling. What you can have is access above that ceiling. So if your walls go all the way to the roof or the next floor, that's fine, or you have some other barrier. But what you can have is just a drop-down ceiling that someone can climb over the wall from the next room and access the pharmacy.
Someone's asking where they can find information on specific record retention requirements. Of course, they're always in the board's rules and in the statute. But if you look at the practice guide actually does have a general chart on record retention requirements. We are updating the practice guide to include the new rules. I was actually working on that this morning. We hope to have that posted probably early to mid-fall, if possible.
Someone wants to know, can they use the new interim supervising pharmacist now, or do you have to wait till August 30th?
We've got to wait until August 30th. And on that interim supervising pharmacist, just to explain, we've had pharmacies who weren't able to find a pick. So they had an unexpected vacancy in their pick position. And our rule currently requires that the pharmacy immediately close until a new pick can be named. The goal of the interim supervising pharmacist for a limited 30-day period is to allow pharmacies time to actually find a pick. Now, I believe the rule says that you have to make a reasonable good faith effort. So you just can't automatically name an interim supervising pharmacist. But if you know you have a pick vacancy coming, you cannot find someone or bring them on board on time, actually took a call on this morning, then you can name an interim supervising pharmacist one time for 30 days.
Someone wants to know, can a stock bottle be in a basket on the floor? Yes, it can be. It just can't be itself sitting on the floor.
Someone's asked, will the pick be on the hook for metrics set by a corporate permit holder? If the pick is consulted and disagrees, it's a good question. So whenever the board looks at a case, the board doesn't automatically hold the pick always responsible. The board is looking at each case on an individual basis, and we will look. Number one, what was the pick's authority? What are the pharmacy's policies and procedures? What actions did the pick take? We always tell licensees you should never agree to be picked in unsafe conditions. And you have the right to express concerns. You can file a complaint with the board. You can also raise concerns with the permit holder. The board will review all of that when looking at pharmacy compliance issues, especially at metrics and quotas and staffing and other things of that nature. Our goal is to push permit holders and the pharmacists in charge into a collaborative relationship, where both of you are coming together and making decisions on what is safe and appropriate for the pharmacy.
Someone's asking about in hospitals, do you have to record the temperature for drug storage areas outside of the pharmacy? The answer would be no. This would only apply to the drugs that are stored in the pharmacy.
Someone asked, how often does the photo need to be updated, the one that's attached to a license? We don't have a requirement for that. We would suggest that you keep them current, but we didn't include one in the rule.
Someone on the 1 year prescription dispensing limit want to know, can you fill it on the last day before it expires? Yes, and it doesn't matter what the quantity is, as long as it's authorized. So their example, can you give a 2-day supply on the last day? The answer is yes, as long as that two-day supply was authorized.
Someone's asking, how does the pick requirement work for a pick that is on extended medical leave or other leave? And that's a very good question that comes in often. And so if a pick is on extended leave, we recommend that you name a alternative pick. You would need to file a pharmacist in charge application with the board before they leave if possible. And then when they return, that would require a second pick change to reinstate them. The new rule will allow you to appoint an interim supervising pharmacist for 30 days only if you cannot find a pick. There's additional information on that in the practice guide. So someone is asking for a relief contract pharmacist. Can they just produce their license on demand? Is that adequate? So I'm assuming you're talking about a pharmacist who's just showing up in the pharmacy that day. If that's not your regular works location, a regular workstation, and you're there just on a 1-day short-term, very short-term basis, then proof of identification on your person is fine, producing your license or an online license verification.
Someone's asking about the requirement for offsite storage. If it needs to be a drug distributor, would a 3PL license work also? If it meets the definition of a 3PL, it would be okay. It would all depend on the ownership of the drugs when that's done. So.
Give us just a second.
So people again asking about closed door pharmacy and the name badge. There is no exemption for the name badges. It applies to all pharmacies located in Missouri.
Someone asked if you need to post job descriptions and performance evaluations for technicians. That's not required by the board's rule. Might be required by your employer, but not under the board's rule. We're getting another question on nicknames on badges. Yes, a nickname can be used as long as we can identify who the person is. Again, This is a good faith effort, and pharmacies should make sure that the public can identify who they are working with.
We got a couple questions on the technology, which we haven't talked about. We'll talk about that at the next webinar. But if you have, some people have some detailed questions. If you want to email those to me, I can answer those for you.
Someone asked if a staff pharmacist needs to have authority to suspend pharmacy services to protect patient safety. Our rule only says that authority has to be given to the PIC, and again, that's temporary only until the permit holder can approve or give further direction, but it doesn't address staff pharmacists, but PICs only. Now, a pharmacy may choose to delegate that authority on their own to the staff pharmacist, but our rule only addresses PICs.
Someone asked to repeat the information on the drop-down ceiling. So we do not ban drop-down ceilings. What we ban is having access above those drop-down ceilings. That you need to make sure there's no access from outside the pharmacy that someone could come through your drop-down ceiling. So that usually means you have a wall that goes all the way to the next floor or a roof, or you have some other kind of barrier above that drop-down ceiling.
Someone else is asking about the practice guide. Thank you very much. We hope it's an informational resource for everyone. It is in the process of updating. We don't want to take it down because so many people use it, including our students who are or graduates who are getting ready to take the exam, but it will be updated before the end of the year. We are shooting for early fall. I think a lot of these questions we're going through, I think maybe duplicates, Tom.
Yes, and we're getting close to running out of time. So like I said, we will change our plans and do the technology rule on the next upcoming webinar, which we'll talk about here.
We'll also be taking questions and doing a Q&A session. Oh, Tom was getting ready to talk about that. We're going to be doing that in August as well. So some of your questions, if we didn't get to them today, you can always email the board office. You can ask your inspector. We also have an Ask the Inspector place on the board's website where inspectors will respond to questions that are submitted by email. So if you have something in the interim, of course, we'd love for you to join us on August the 11th. But if you have something in the interim, you can also use those resources.
So our next webinar will be on August 11th. The main topic will be the legislative session. Kim will be back to give an update on that. We'll do the technology rules then, and then we were planning to have a Q&A session with Kim and I both taking questions again. So and we will let people submit questions in advance for that. And then on September 15th, Inspector Katie DeBold will be with me to give an update on the sterile compounding regulations and compliance issues that we see out there. And then on October 13th, we'll do our annual compliance update. I usually pick a topic or two to talk a little bit about, and then we have an extended question and answer session with the inspectors.
And Tom, can I interrupt just a second? I want to remind all pharmacists that pharmacist renewals will be mailed in the beginning of August. This is a CE reporting year. You do need 30 hours of CE to renew. Please check CPE Monitor, check your records, because we want to make sure everyone is in compliance before the October 31st date.
As I mentioned earlier, we do record all our webinars. You can find them on the board's website under the resources tab. So far this year, we've had 3. We had a COVID update. Mike Boger from BNDD was here for a BNDD update. And then last month, we did a pharmacist administration update. For continuing education, you must complete the CE, the post survey to earn your CE. So after I close the browser, after I close the webinar, do not close your browser. A screen will pop up and have you hit close. Again, do not close your browser. After that, a survey will open. You answer the questions online and click submit. If for any reason you don't get the survey and the questions, and sometimes we hear people on phones have trouble and tablets obtaining them, you can email us at compliance@pr.mo.gov and we will email you the questions, but you must have the answers back to us within 24 hours to be considered for CE. Again, a reminder, we do not submit to CPE Monitor, so save your certificates. We will email them out in approximately 30 days. We no longer mail them. They will all come by email. So again, on behalf of the Board of Pharmacy, we thank you for joining our webinar today.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm now going to end the webinar.